The separate query from modifier technique involves keeping code that modifies an object's state separate from code that queries its state. This refactoring technique aims to enhance code readability, maintainability, and flexibility. Hello everyone, and welcome to the first lecture of the refactoring course. In this lecture, we'll be focusing on the separate query from modifier technique. This technique falls under the method refactoring category in our refactoring diagram. Okay, what does separate query from modifier mean? In programming, a query is a piece of code that retrieves data from an object. It's commonly used to retrieve data or perform calculations based on the object's current state. On the other hand, a modifier is a piece of code that changes or updates the state of an object. It can modify properties or perform any operations that alter the object's state. This technique advises against combining querying and modifying the object's state in the same code snippet. This means that queries should only retrieve data and not change the object's state. Modifiers, on the other hand, should focus solely on making necessary changes without returning any values. By following this technique, it becomes easier to understand the code and grasp its purpose and behavior. When code is smaller and has a specific purpose, it can be reused in other parts of the program, reducing duplicate code. As a result, we can eliminate duplication and make the code more maintainable. Separating queries from modifiers also follows the single responsibility principle, which means each component or function should have a single responsibility. This approach makes the code more modular, flexible, and easier to test. By the way guys, we'll also cover solid principles in another one of our clean code courses. Okay, but how we can implement this technique? Analyze the code and identify the parts that retrieve information and the parts that change the object's state. Extract the queries into separate methods. Any code that retrieves a specific data should be separated into its own method. Extract the modifiers into separate methods. Ensure that the modifier methods focus solely on modifying the specific state and do not return any values. Finally, replace the origin method with newly extracted methods. Alright, let's look at an example and see the separate query from modifier technique in action. In this example, the calculate order price method calculates the total price of the products based on their prices. Let's take a look at this method. First, we declare a variable called total price and initialize it to 0. Next, we check if the product's property contains any items. If there are products, we iterate over each product and calculate the total price by multiplying the price of each item by its quantity and adding the result to the total price variable. After calculating the total price, we send a notification to the customer. Finally, we return the total price. As you can see, this method combines both querying and modifying operations. To improve the code, we can apply the separate query from modifier technique by extracting the modifying and querying logic into separate methods. First, let's analyze the code and identify the querying and modifying parts. Currently, this method not only calculates the total price, but also checks if the product list has any items, and also sending a notification to the customer. As a result, we have 2 queries and 1 modifier. Alright, for the second step, let's extract the query logic into separate methods. By separating these concerns into distinct methods, we improve the code's clarity and maintainability. Okay, for the third step, we don't need to do anything because the sendNotification method has already been separated. Finally, for the last step, let's replace the origin method with the newly extracted methods. Alright, here, first, we check if the product list is empty by calling the isProductList empty method. If the product list is not empty, we proceed to calculate the total price by calling the calculateTotalPrice method. Finally, we send a notification to the customer using the sendNotification method. Okay, as you can see, by separating querying from modifying in separate methods, the code becomes easier to read and understand. Each method has a clear purpose and focuses on a specific task, leading to more maintainable code. Also, this technique promotes modular code design, which allows for better code organization and promotes code reuse, and it becomes easier to modify or extend the code in the future without impacting other parts of the application. Before concluding this lecture, it's important to understand that this technique, along with other refactoring techniques, are not absolute rules. For instance, we mentioned that the modifier should primarily focus on making changes without returning any values. However, there are cases where we perform a delete modifying operation and return the deleted item data as a result. In such cases, it's a good practice to return the deleted item data along with the modifying operation. Nevertheless, in most cases, we adhere to the separate query from modifier technique. Okay, done. See you soon with another lecture.